I'm Batman. You know what? I forgot the mask. So The Dark Knight Rises graced theaters not too long ago, and with it came an absolutely amazing soundtrack, composed by none other than Hans Zimmer. Now, Hans Zimmer has done a lot of work over the years in different genres. He's done such work as The Lion King, Frost Nixon, Sherlock Holmes, Pirates of the Caribbean, and The Rock. Some of the pieces that are in The Dark Knight Rises soundtrack are soft and subtle, and there's also these darker and brutal pieces. It's a bit like you're getting beaten by a big disgruntled lumberjack. There's these monks that have come out and they've started chanting nursery rhymes. And just as it gets to that point where you're about to take on this lumberjack and bring him down, the Batmobile shows up out of nowhere and Tron steps out. So what I can say about the Dark Knight Rises soundtrack is that it's a bit brutal, has some really awesome heroic pieces, a little bit of elegance thrown in, and a techno track to boot. Now for our trivia. What was Hans Zimmer's first Oscar nomination? We'll have the answer for you by the end of the show. This is where I get a chance to share with you my top 3 picks from the soundtrack. So coming at number 3 are actually 2 tracks from the soundtrack. These 2 tracks flow so perfectly and seamlessly, and they tell such a wonderful story. And that is track number 10, Fear Will Find You. It makes me think of standing in the middle of the forest and you start running. It's because you just saw a bunch of ninja squirrels. You're climbing trees, jumping over ravines and creeks. And finally, you find yourself descending into this little valley and you take shelter into the shadows. And that's where next track picks in. And that's track number 11, which is Why Do We Fall? It starts off where that last track left off in something soft and subtle and starts to build into the heroic theme that we hear throughout the Dark Knight Rises soundtrack. So as you're standing in the shadows and you begin climbing, at first it's difficult, and then you begin to feel your courage kick in, the adrenaline starts to pick up, and you find yourself moving faster and faster up the wall until you're at the top. Then the wind picks up, you rip off your parachute pants, and you raise them up in the air, and you take a flying leap towards the squirrels so that you can show them that you too can fly by the seat of your pants. Alright, on to my second pick of the soundtrack, and that is track number 13, Imagine the Fire. And it's the Adrenaline Junkies track. This entire track is fast-paced. It builds with the brutal themes, it builds with the heroic themes, and then it has the soft and subtle themes that are thrown in there. And you can also hear the chanting, and it's not as harsh and brutal as it is before, but it's a mix of the heroic chanting and a brutal chanting, as if the two voices are competing for each other and fighting it out in the percussion battle. So I've given you something brutal, heroic, and for the adrenaline junkies, but now this one's a little bit more on the subtle side, and this is why I love this track. It's track number 4, Mind If I Cut In. It kind of slinks, and you hear it kind of tiptoe with the piano. It reminds me of you've gone to bed, the whole family's asleep, and you wake up at 2 a.m. and you realize, I'm hungry. You want to go in and eat that chocolate piece of cake that's in the fridge that you've promised your kids. You kind of ease your way out of bed, get to the kitchen, you open the fridge, pull out the cake, go sit down, and you go to eat that cake. You put the fork in, you start to bring it up to your lips, and you hear something. You stop for a moment and listen, and then you finish eating your cake. And you really don't care what's going to come from eating this cake. You're enjoying your cake. You're enjoying what's happening. And that's really what this track is like. It doesn't care that there's something brutal that follows it and there's this heroic battle that takes place. It has no care in the world for any of that. All it cares about is the cake. Alright, now on to my overall rating for the Dark Knight Rises soundtrack, Deluxe Edition. The Dark Knight Rises soundtrack tells a fantastic story from start to finish. The only problem I had was the techno track that shows up, and that isn't a bad track, just that it doesn't fit well with the rest of the soundtrack. Now another thing I look at is my playlist value, and that is how well do some of these tracks stand on their own. There are 2 tracks in here that I would not really put in by themselves in any playlist that I would use. They were way too short. They were 30 seconds and 23 seconds. The rating scale that I give is a decibel rating scale of a -10 to a +10, with 0 being about average, And for the Dark Knight Rises soundtrack, he came in at an 8.44 rating.
Alright, earlier in the show, we asked what was Hans Zimmer's first Oscar nomination. The answer is Brain Man.
So that's it for today's episode of Soundtrackin. Again, thank you very much for watching, and for all of those who gave me feedback, thank you guys. Thank you again for watching the show, and if you want to subscribe to my channel, it's right down here, and so you can take a look at it. Also, if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Soundtrackin, and we'll see you again next week when we look at, well, we can't really look at soundtracks. See you again next week when we listen to some more, well, we're not listening. See you again next week when I talk about some more soundtracks.
We asked what was Hans Zimmer's first Oscar nomination. The answer is Brain Man.